Hi, thank you very much. I'm so excited. This is so intimate too.
It is,
Yeah, I love it. My first question is, what does it mean when we are made in the image of God?
Yep. So is that what you want to talk about? Or do you want to talk about, are you ready to do some editing?
Yeah. Oh, okay. We can come back to another time.
Yeah, but let's just mention that. It's a good question because at the moment, most people sort of view God. How do you view God? I don't want to ask you how you view God.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's like when you're reading the Bible and all that. For me, he feels like very masculine, like almost.
But can you see when you're reading the Bible, you're not really feeling God, are you?
No.
So.
And
So you could say for yourself, when you sort of feel God to be a man.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's if you think about that, that's interesting in itself, isn't it? That you feel God to have a certain or specific gender. Yep.
Yes, more so than woman, more so than feminine.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, hard for you to think of God as a woman.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people on earth would probably agree with that. Most people on earth do struggle to think of God having feminine qualities as well as masculine qualities. So what else? What else for you?
Feels like I can't think of the word, but I've had a lot of tantrums at God, and I've screamed and yelled and all that, and yet I haven't been struck by lightning, haven't been run over, like you know what I mean? It's like he's got like a tolerance or patience or like a...
Yeah, but also I feel from you this other feeling that he's not listening either. So you sort of feel, yes, he's got tolerance and patience for you yelling and screaming, but why isn't he listening to you yelling and screaming and giving you some response? You know, that's also part of the feeling, right?
Yes.
So a lot of people feel God's aloof, don't they? And just like Daddy was probably for many.
Yeah.
Aloof. What else?
I do. Only because I'm still working out why I could do it.
Yeah.
Was I could pray for God's love when I was sincere, and receive it. So there is kind of like, it's like a grace or a kindness mixed in amongst it. It's hard to put a word on it. I'm still, you told me to look at my sincerity and see when I was and why was I, you told me to like reflect on that. So
but can you see you're starting to try to list all of the positive things you think?
Yes. But
a lot of your actual actions with God are not that positive because you've been yelling and screaming at him a lot, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So why have you been yelling and screaming at him a lot? It's a good question.
Yeah.
And I say him because that's the way you're thinking of God as a him. Yep.
Why have I been yelling and screaming? I was angry at why did God give me my parents? Like, why did he, when he knows they're going to be abusive.
Yeah.
My family was abusive.
Yeah.
Like guns, a lot. Abusive. And I mean, I was able to yell and scream again, not get struck by lightning, not.
Yeah.
And so,
But there's still sort of the feeling that God allowed all these bad things to happen to me.
To children, like God allows. I understand as an adult, I can do something, and I've got to, and it's a bit different to a child.
Well, again, these are taints in your feelings about God, because a lot of these things that you're saying are not true. So you think they're true, and you're stating them as if they're true, but they're not actually true. But the reason why I'm asking you these sort of personal questions is because every time we have a concept of God, for the most part, it's not really of God. It's really of our experience that we're projecting on God. So it's not really a concept of God that we really have. It's a experience that we have had in our upbringing that we then believe if there is a God, we believe certain things about that God as being a part of God's attributes and character, right? Now, the reason why I'm saying all that is because all of that is going to taint the view you have of God, of what is God's nature, what is God's attributes. And then if we are made in God's image, which was your original question.
What does that mean?
Then we're sort of made in the image of this flawed God with all of these taints of character. And so then we start projecting at ourselves and every human, there's also that taint of character that person has that matches the taint of character that I see or feel God has. And then we sort of say that we're made in God's image, so that means God's flawed and God has problems and God is not very logical and also not very kind at times, which are all the things that humans are frequently, particularly in their sin, right? Humans are like this in their sin. And so, unfortunately, what we start doing is we start associating the character and attributes of God that we believe are flawed to also the character and attributes of humans that we associate the gender of God to be. So, for you, that's a lot about men. Men are like this. Men don't really care. Men don't really, listen to me. I can yell and scream and they don't really even respond. They just go, like they seem to not have any feelings type of thing almost. And these are the things that we frequently start then feeling are a part of the man, for you, part of the man, and also a part of God. Now, of course, it's not a part of any of those things. They're all injuries. All of these things that you said were injuries. So when it comes to understanding what God is and then also what you are.
Yes, that's my other thing on.
Because you're made in the image of God.
Yes. Yeah.
You see, you're going to have to get rid of a lot of these injuries from childhood before you can understand. And what I notice a lot of people want to do is they sort of want to have an intellectual concept of God that does not match their emotional concept of God because they're too confronted to deal with their emotional concept of God. The problem with that is if somebody like me comes along and says, well, no, God's not like that, God's like this, you're not in a state where you can hear what I'm saying because your own injuries dictate what you can hear, emotionally dictate what you can hear. So you can have all this intellectual concept be presented and fundamentally your heart be unchanged in how you perceive God and also how you perceive yourself. You follow?
Yes, I do.
So I sort of feel like it's a good question, but there's a lot of advanced work that needs to be done inside of the person before you can substantially answer the question, what is God's nature and personality? And then, because that's linked to you being in the image of God, what is the actual human nature and personality, which is divorced from or separate to the character of the individual, the flawed character of the individual. And while we can have discussions, and sometimes we have had discussions recently about the nature and character of God, but only to a group of people who have already done that emotional work and gotten rid of a lot of the flaws they believe that God has and gotten rid of the concept of God emotionally. And those people can then listen to what God really is like. But other people, when I'm talking about this, it's like it just goes, you can say it goes over their heads, but that's not really what happens. It goes over their heart. It's sort of like, it's like it doesn't touch their heart. So you get all this head knowledge without there being any heart knowledge to it in that place. And it's only the heart knowledge that's going to benefit you in your concept of God and yourself. That all being said, obviously you can, if you start analysing with your head, because a lot of people, that's where they start analysing, isn't it? not with their emotions, but with their mind. If you start analysing with your mind things that God can't be, at least you can then go, well, I think God is like that, but obviously, logically, God can't be. And then you can start, you could say, critiquing your own concept of God in a more emotional manner, right? Which is what I recommend everybody really does. Like, so a lot of times, you're like the whole yelling and screaming God is actually done because you believe God is what you believe God to be. Because if you didn't believe it, you wouldn't want to yell at him. Does that make sense?
That's true.
So the fact that you're okay yelling at him and you're okay getting bitter and twisted with him and you're okay blaming him and you're okay blaming him for what was substantially human problems means that you don't really understand God yet on an emotional level, and you're almost using your current understanding to justify the rage with God rather than deal with your rage with your mum and dad.
Yeah.
You follow? Right,
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Yeah, so your rage with your mum and dad covers over large amounts of grief with your mum and dad. So the average person doesn't even want to touch their rage with their mum and dad. What they want to do is ignore all their rage with the mum and dad and blame God for it all. Like, so in other words, mum and dad treated me badly, why did God allow it? Instead of, why did my mum and dad allow it? Which is a bigger question, isn't it? Why would you, as a parent, have children only to abuse them one way or the other?
It doesn't make sense, does it?
No, but instead of asking that question, the majority of us are asking, why did God allow it? Rather than going, well, why were my mum and dad so stupid? And why were my mum and dad so, nasty to me? And why were my mum and dad so illogical? And why were my mum and dad, expecting that I'm going to grow up sound when they're also being abusive? Like, why would a person expect that? And the reason why we don't want to ask those questions is because we don't want to go through the emotions associated with our mum and dad. Because those emotions are painful, and the average person doesn't want to address them. So it's easier to get angry with God than it is to get upset with mum and dad, and to actually work through your issues with mum and dad. Not only that, it's easier to get angry with both God and your mum and dad's rather than work through your own issues. It's easier to, so it's easier to go, right, I think, I'm an arrogant person now. Mum and dad taught me how to be an arrogant person, so it's all their fault. Rather than go, well, I'm an arrogant person now and I'm choosing to remain so, that's my fault. I need to address that and I need to deal with that. So it's easy to blame other people than it is to look at yourself. And the main reason why it is easier is because when you blame other people, you don't have to feel the painful emotions. That's why it's easier. You don't have to go into the pain associated with the feelings. Now, unless you do all of that, a discussion about what it means for you to be in the image of God is going to be a very difficult discussion to understand. Can you see? Yeah. Because to understand that discussion, we've got to look firstly at the personality and nature of God and understand it. And then also we've got to look at you could say, the scientific reality of God and believe that it is a scientific reality that God exists. And then on top of that, we're going to have to look at the scientific reality of God's soul and what the attributes and characteristics of God's soul are. And then on top of that, we're going to have some concept of an infinite being. So a finite being having some concept of an infinite being. Once we've done all that, we can start looking at what it means for us to be made in the image of that being.
It's a big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I feel like it might take me 50 years to...
Well, no, it doesn't. You can get some concept, but the fastest way to get a concept of God is what?
Ask God.
Well, how do you ask God? It's all through your
emotions,
feelings.
Yeah.
So unless you're pretty open to receiving answers with feelings, you might ask, but you're not going to get an answer, are you?
No, and that's one of the things that you had, the last things that you said on your tour was develop the humility to accept God's truth.
Yeah. So you need to be able to gain a concept of God emotionally.
Yeah.
The way that's going to happen is when God shares herself with you through the expression of her love, you will also, as a part of that, be passed information about God, and therefore you will start to gain a concept of God emotionally, which you can also then pass upon yourself as a concept of yourself in the image of God that you'll begin to also understand. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. But a intellectual discussion about the image of God, while we can have it, might not benefit you very much unless you do all those other things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not against having the conversation, because I love any discussion about God. But what I'm saying is the majority of people that we converse about God with don't really emotionally grasp the full extent of the information being given, because there's a closed heart towards the information itself emotionally. So while you're open to it intellectually, not so open emotionally.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, I would agree with you on that one.
Well, whether you did or not, it's the same fact. But also, the fact that you're yelling and screaming at God is proof. The fact that you're getting angry with God is proof. Now, I'm not saying don't get angry with God if you feel like getting angry with God, because that would be against your emotional state. But I'm saying the fact that you feel angry with God is evidence that you don't really have a true concept of God. Does that make sense? And therefore, while you, it's like when you're angry with anything, while you're angry with something, do you really feel very open to receiving a logical and reasonable explanation about that thing? It's not real, is it? It doesn't happen, does it? It's like every time you're angry with something, it's like, I can't even listen about that subject, really. And for the most part, most of us on earth can't listen about a number of things. And one of the things is about God, but the other is about the other half of yourself, or what you are. Being that you're one half of your soul, you're not a complete individual. You're one half of an individual. The average person struggles greatly even with that concept, which, if you think about it, is one of the ways in which we're in the image of God. Like our soul, which is a complete unit, is in the image of God. You, Deidre, is a half of one, half of one soul, and that's not the image of God without the other half. Right? The image of God is the whole soul, not the half of the soul. So even just understanding, that God is a whole, complete soul, and what it means for you to be a whole, complete soul, is a big part of you understanding what it means for you to be made in the image of God.
Yeah, sense? I figured it had something to do with that, but yeah, I wasn't, because I just, how you said, even with the humility, love and all that, we just hear the words and like even
without understanding it,
yeah. Like, and as a painter or something, well, image to me means picture.
That's right.
And so, well, am I even not even?
But if you think even about a picture, it evokes emotion, doesn't it?
Yes,
it does. Yeah. And so the way you really look at a picture is not with your mind; it's really with your feelings. So when you walked into the studio today, and you see it's all colourful and whatever, what are the feelings? So if we just had black panels, which we could have bought, couldn't we? We could have all just had black panels around here, which would all be sound panels. That'd be cool. The problem today is, like most men wear black, only black, because it's cool. Like that's the general view nowadays. But what does black evoke?
Like darkness.
Yeah.
Gloom.
Boring.
Depression.
Yeah.
Boring.
Yeah, a lot of things. There's a lot of emotion that the colour itself evokes. And so if you think of a picture is not just about what you see, it's also what it's evoking in you emotionally. And this is the same with your picture of God. It's going to evoke feelings in you emotionally. And the more you're in connection with the truth of those feelings, the more you understand the nature of God, and the more you understand the nature of God, because you're made in the image of God, the more you'll potentially understand your own self as well.
It's like a journey, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it's nothing. It can't be done straight. It can't be done immediately. It's not something.
Not a 5-minute job.
It's not a 5-minute job, and it never will be, because God's an infinite being, and He made your soul to approach the infinite as well. So He made your soul in such a way that it could receive a part of the infinite. and in itself become infinite, or potentially moving towards infinite. So if you think about the perfect natural human, they have a limitation of development of the sixth sphere, but it also means their soul can't change from what God designed the perfect human to be. Now, the only way you can get beyond the perfect human is to receive a part of the infinite nature of God. So that's what you receiving love is all about. Love is, like God's love, is an infinite quality inside of God that he can express to all of his children. And as you receive some of it, you also start understanding things about infinity versus limitation. You understand things like growing all the time rather than growing to the point where you're comfortable. Right? So when you grow to the point where you're comfortable, you basically say, I'm comfortable now, there's a limit.
And that's where I'm at the moment, and where
I wouldn't say you're comfortable though. You imagine yourself to be the comfortable that you can be, most comfortable you can currently be.
I'm not suicidal anymore, it's probably more what that was a horrible place. Well, before I met you, it was a horrible place. It
is a horrible place. But it's not the limitation of how much happiness you can have.
Correct.
Right? And so the problem is most of us are completely unaware that God's very happy. When I say very happy, he's infinitely happy. Right? So as you approach the infinite, you will become happier too. There's a natural consequence of receiving some of God's love, and also becoming more like God. You become happier as a person, but that also requires, and Deirdre knows this, it also requires you getting rid of your unhappiness.
Yes.
And the only way you can get rid of unhappiness is by
crying.
Well, experiencing it. Yes. And Deirdre doesn't want to do that. That's why she's having her tantrum with God, right? Because she doesn't want to have that unhappiness. But even then, not understanding that actually if you got rid of your own unhappiness, it would be good for you.
I wouldn't even know myself again. Like, I don't even know myself from like before. Like, I think
when you were like in the abused, like depressed and suicidal state versus the now state. And you compare the two and you go, wow, like this is different.
I feel like, this is like great.
Yeah, that's right. But and this is the problem with limitation. See, the beauty of understanding a part of God's nature that is infinite, you can start to see that, maybe my happiness can be beyond what I'm content with it being now. And you start to realise those things too. And you only do that when you start grasping God's nature. And then grasping that your soul has the ability to approach God's nature by receiving a part of God's nature. So, like, at some point we will have discussions about what it means to be made in the image of God in a proper manner. We will. In a really quite detailed way. And we'll talk about it at the, you could say, the scientific design level versus also the emotional level and the sexual level and the spiritual levels. Because God, all of these things are a part of God's soul. And so, we can talk about all of those characteristics that God has and how God's implanted those, or the potential of those characteristics in ourselves. But you can see that without the heart being involved, it's not going to have much power. The discussion,
I understand that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the little taste.
But it is an important subject.
And really what you're saying there, a key point for Deirdre, isn't it, is that until you give up your fight for your image of God and your version
image of self too.
Of self, and you're fighting for what you think is reality, both about you and God.
Yeah.
And until you give that up, it will be very hard for you to receive emotionally the truth about God.
You'll hear someone yabbering about it for years, and then after 10 years you'll still not really get it in your feelings. But you can also work through your feelings and get it within a month or two. So, the better course of action is to work through your feelings and get it within a month or two, rather than have a discussion, an exhaustive discussion for 10, 15 years and still not understand it at all. right, and still not really impact your life at all.
Sometimes we want to have the, well, you go ahead, Deirdre.
I was going to say, because I've been one of those people that have been listening for like 15 years.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's only through your living room talks that I've realised I really don't understand, like,
That's right.
a lot of things. And God, the image of God, like
Yeah,
all that.
yeah.
I'm just like,
We
I
find
thought
that
I
with
did.
most people who listen though, Deirdre.
I've been arrogant, been so arrogant for the like.
Sort of like, I get that, let's move on.
But it's
Yeah.
like, no,
Yeah.
and that's been.
The people who are truly understanding are always very much impacted emotionally by their understanding. The people who think they understand but have not been impacted emotionally can be 10 years later and you're still discussing the same subjects with them, they still don't grasp them, and they've fundamentally made no major changes in their life in that period. So that is a good measure of whether you understand at your heart level. What I'm saying is, well, it's one thing to say a person doesn't understand at their heart level. The other thing we need to do is go, why don't I understand at my heart level? What's preventing me from having an emotional grasp of a subject versus an intellectual one? Right? And if you look at it honestly, you can see there's a lot of emotions that prevent a person from having an emotional grasp of a subject. And unless they release those emotions, the intellectual grasp may change, but it still will be nothing touching them emotionally. It still won't affect their life. And this is what we notice when we're teaching divine truth, is we might be teaching someone for 15 years, and at the end of the 15 years, they substantially still have not made a single major change in their life. Right? And the reason why that is because there's no emotional understanding of the power of having a relationship with God, because there's still not one. There's still not a relationship with God.
It's not even like understanding myself.
Correct. Or a way to receive God's love, or any of these other things. And so the challenge as a teacher is to go, no, I've got to be honest with you. You've been listening for a long time, but substantially you're the same person that we met 15 years ago, barring the fact that you're not as depressed anymore. Does that make sense? Which is a good thing.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing. But you could be much happier than you currently are. You'd also have much deeper understanding. You could have much deeper appreciation for God, and therefore also have a much deeper appreciation of what you should do with your life with that understanding.
Yes.
But that is all up to you. That's where free will comes in. That's a free will choice. And a teacher can't, you can say,
That's right.
a teacher can't bombard you or manipulate you into making that choice. A good teacher is just going to say, here's the information.
Yeah.
What are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
And often just as Jesus is saying, often when you're still fighting, as I said earlier, for that version of yourself that this is who I am, this is how I am, this is how God is, this is what is real, even sometimes you're emotionally embroiled in that fight, which you are, and then you ask for more information from the teacher, but really what you're wanting is for the teacher to get you over that fight, for more information to help that fight go away.
To frog leap at the fight.
To frog leap the pain and suffering.
Yes.
Help you give up the fight when really you're the one who's very invested in the fight, and you want there to just be more information to help the fight be over instead of going through the pain.
And in fact, it's even worse than that for most people. Most people want to hear from the teacher that they don't have to go through a fight. There'll be some magical.
That's what I'm saying.
There'll be some magical way in which just rub out the fight.
Or Jesus would just answer you. This is what the image of God is. And you're, oh, great.
Now I'm not going to fight anymore. Most of us want that. We want this sort of feeling that it shouldn't be hard work. It should be easier than it seems to be. And most of us are in this place where we want it to be easier. And then because we want it to be easier, we're very resistive to somebody telling us, no, it's not going to be an easy process. You're going to have to go through the feelings, right? And in fact, you're very tempted to get angry with the very person telling you the very thing you need to do. To become a happier person. if you think about most, people who visit psychiatrists or psychologists, if you visited a psychiatrist and you wanted a medication and you didn't get some, how do you feel? If you wanted it and you go, I want the pill, I want the solution to be a pill, and you don't get the pill,
you'd be pissed.
You're annoyed. Yeah.
Sorry, it's our fault.
That's all right. Yeah. And then on the other hand, if you if you go to a psychologist and you want him to tell you that you're really a much nicer person than you really are and everything, and it's so good, and it's really all somebody else's fault that you're having the problems you have. And if he doesn't do that, what do you feel? Isn't it the same? Like,
yeah, get another one.
Upset with him. And I can't hear him anymore, not listening to him anymore. Right. And this is a big problem we have on earth, isn't it? That we don't want to hear the very thing that is going to solve the majority of our problems. Yeah. So those of you who have spirit influences, well, oftentimes you don't want to hear that you do. For those of you who have some grief to feel, you don't want to hear that you have the grief to feel. For those of you who have shame to feel, you don't want to hear that you have shame to feel. For those of you who are arrogant, you don't want to hear you're arrogant. You want to, feel something else instead. And often the very thing that would actually relieve your life of the pain and suffering is the very thing you're holding on to. Yeah. And that is something to deal with as a part of your growth. And I find growth really interesting because that when you're here right now, in the state you're in right now, you don't really know what tomorrow's going to bring. And you don't really know what you look like right now. Right? From God's perspective. You're only going to learn what you look like right now by actually receiving God's perspective of what you look like right now. And for most of us, it's impossible to receive that because we don't want to know. So we're in a state of cluelessness until such a time comes along that you no longer wish to be in that state on these matters. And that is a personal decision. Your cluelessness on any issue is a personal decision to remain clueless on that issue. God has given us so much wealth of knowledge in the universe, and also has the conscience, given you the conscience in order to receive that knowledge directly from God. If you're in a state where you're not aware of your problems, then it's because you didn't want to be aware of your problems. Yeah. Right? And it's very important to face that truth. Every individual who progresses, it's very important to face that truth. The thing you can change is your lack of desire to be aware. You need to develop a desire to be aware, rather than have a lack of desire to be aware.
And that's what I think I had. I've had a lack of desire
Yep.
to want to look at myself like from a sin
And to feel your pain. See, part
Yes.
of being aware is feeling what you are right now. Not the illusion of what you are right now, but feeling what you are. Now, that's a challenging thing to do. And that's why most people don't do it, because it's challenging. And that's why most people listen to Divine Truth for 2 or 3 years and then don't listen anymore, because it's challenging to actually do the thing, the very thing that's going to bring the benefit to you, with regard to listening to the truth. While you're listening to the truth and it's all external, that's all well and good, and it is quite fascinating. You can be fascinated. We could actually, for the next 20 years, discuss external matters of truth with you, and all of you would probably be completely intellectually fascinated with it. Right? We could do that. But that's not the same as having a relationship with God and the joy that a relationship with God can bring you. So, we can have these very long, convoluted discussions about, and sometimes I used to a lot get involved in them, right? Because I'm fascinated by them a lot as well. But I'm also aware that unless there is a shift emotionally inside of the person towards God and towards God's love and towards God's truth at an emotional level, and unless they're developed a humble desire to receive that truth, there won't be any personal benefit to the discussion. So your happiness won't change. Your joy of life won't change. Your relationships won't change. Your friendships won't change. Whatever you've got now, you would still have 10 years' time or worse, generally.
Because I know 10 or 15 years ago, I did feel the change. because
At the beginning.
Yeah.
When you're enthusiastic and you
Yeah.
wanted to make some change.
Yeah.
But as soon as you start feeling, oh, this is a bit hard, having to feel that grief in particular, a bit hard, the average person just switches off then and wants to find an alternate truth, but it's not true. You know, they want to, you know, we see that all the time. We get emails constantly about people going, oh, have you heard about this particular thing and that particular thing and this particular drug and that particular, you know, process that you can follow and all that. These things are all in alignment with what you're teaching. I go, no, they're not. None of them are in alignment with what I'm teaching. What I'm teaching is that you are fully responsible for your raw emotion, and you, by yourself, have the complete capacity to feel it. You know, you don't need a drug, and you don't need alcohol, and you don't need, you know, some kind of process. You don't need to tap your, you know, trigger points, and you don't need a regular whatever to do it. You can do it, but the thing that determines whether you do it is your will and your desire. Your will being what you currently feel, and your desire is what you wish to feel for your future, right? And that's what's going to drive you in the end. And once you realise the power of that internally, you will find you will love the truth, and you want to listen to people who speak it, but you'll also want to do it, not just listen. You want to practice it. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there any other questions about that subject, guys? All very shy today. Is that because of the new event format? Not in the house anymore, Rob. So Rob, I think so.
Hi, I was just wondering if there was any spirits who are really excited about this new venue, or
Yeah.
anyone who wants to talk to us?
Well, I've been honest about getting it done for a while. But not in an unkind manner, but I've been saying, you need to get in the studio, you need to get in the studio.
That's not a question I've got for you, I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, they've been talking about it for some time with us, just in terms of the benefits of being able to be here and the time savings of being here for us, but also the fact we can fit a bit more people here as well, so that, you know, in the house it's sort of 30 people, here it's close to 50, so it's a bit more space for people to come. But then there's also the potentials of like sharing more regularly and getting the studio up back to the purpose it was built for, you know, like as well. And also helps us a lot, Mary and I a lot, because we're sort of in the state where there's so many things to do, there's so little time to do it. So we want to make sure that when we do something, that it's going to have some kind of long-term benefit for everybody, including ourselves, you know.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So the problem with doing it in the house is there's not a long-term benefit for anybody. There's a limitation of being in the house. I know many of you liked it because it was sort of more intimate and everything, but at the end of the day, it's also very limiting to growth and everything. And even this event space is a limitation to growth if we stay limited by it. Yeah.
I was wondering if there's anyone around now?
Well, there's definitely spirits around now. We keen to do the mediumship?
Yeah.
That's why there's no other question.
Yeah,
Just
so
have a
that's
drink of
good.
water.